Every disaster on this list was built by the person it destroyed. No villains, no accidents, just humans, confidently, walking straight into catastrophe. Here are 31 of them. 1. If you're legally right, you should keep fighting. Courts exist to correct injustice. The truth wins eventually. Just stay the course and trust the process. That belief has financially destroyed more people than the original injustice ever could have. Litigation is a machine that charges by the hour regardless of who is morally correct, and being right does not make you solvent. There is a real legal case, Jennings versus Jennings, that began in 1798 and ran until 1915, consuming the entire estate it was supposedly protecting. The inheritance ceased to exist before the case did. That is not an anomaly. That is the system working exactly as designed. Standard civil attorneys bill between $300 and $500 per hour. Complex cases routinely exceed $100,000 per year before a single verdict is reached. And here is the number that should end the argument immediately. Approximately 61% of plaintiffs who reject settlement offers end up worse off after trial than they would have been had they accepted. More than half. The people who fought hardest, longest, and most righteously lost more than they would have by walking away. Self-represented litigants, people who decide to handle it themselves because how hard can it be, prevail in roughly 4% of federal cases compared to 14% with representation. Yet thousands pursue multi-year cases alone because they cannot afford an attorney, which means they cannot afford to win, which means they are paying the machine to process their loss in slow motion. There are documented cases of individuals spending over $100,000 in legal fees to recover a $5,000 deposit. The legal cost exceeded the original dispute by 2,000%. The person won the argument and lost their savings, their time, their health, and in some cases, their marriage. The psychological trap that keeps people inside this machine is called sunk cost litigation. The more money already spent, the more convinced you become that the next hearing will be the one that fixes everything, and so you keep feeding it. You are not fighting for justice at that point. You are paying a very expensive casino to let you keep pulling a broken slot machine because you already put in so many quarters. 2. Getting a patent means you've protected your idea. The law is on your side. The money is coming. You had the idea first, and the system rewards that. It does not. A patent is not a revenue stream. It is an expensive legal placeholder that requires you to fund an entirely separate war to enforce it, and most individuals cannot survive that war financially. Filing a patent costs between $5,000 and $15,000 for a basic application. A full prosecution through the United States Patent and Trademark Office, with attorney fees, averages $15,000 to $30,000 for a simple mechanical invention. That is just to own the piece of paper. Having a patent and defending it are completely separate financial events, and the second one costs dramatically more than the first. Patent litigation averages $2.5 million per side through trial, according to the American Intellectual Property Law Association. $2.5 million per side before any outcome is known. Large corporations have legal departments whose entire job is to absorb infringement accusations and out-litigate individual inventors, knowing the inventor will exhaust their funds before a verdict is reached. They are not trying to win quickly. They are trying to make winning too expensive. Many inventors have signed over their patents for nominal sums, sometimes as little as $1, simply to escape the legal costs after a company began infringing on their work. They owned the idea and couldn't afford to keep it. The timeline compounds the damage. The average small inventor spends 3 to 7 years in legal proceedings before seeing any enforcement result, during which the technology they patented frequently becomes obsolete. You spent a decade protecting something the market no longer needs. The patent office itself creates a specific trap. It grants patents to ideas that are later found non-novel during litigation, meaning the inventor spent tens of thousands of dollars protecting something they did not legally own in the first place. The protection was an illusion, sold to them by the process. Congratulations. You just bought a very official certificate proving you had a great idea, and then handed that certificate to a corporation's legal department as target practice. 3. If you eat almost nothing, you will lose weight fast. The math is simple. Calories in, calories out. Restrict aggressively, drop the weight, done. Except the human body does not run on simple math. It runs on survival logic, and when you drop calories severely enough, your body interprets it as a famine event and responds by systematically dismantling the machinery needed to burn calories in the first place. This is called metabolic adaptation, and it is not a theory. It is a documented physiological process. When caloric intake drops below 800 calories per day, the body reduces resting metabolic rate by 20 to 30% within weeks. The body becomes more efficient at surviving on less, which sounds impressive until you realize what that actually means. It is physically burning fewer calories at rest because it has concluded you are starving, and it needs to protect you. The Minnesota starvation experiment, conducted from 1944 to 1945, placed 36 healthy men on severe caloric restriction, 1,770 calories per day, for 6 months. They developed obsessive food thoughts, severe depression, extreme fatigue, and a dramatic metabolic slowdown that persisted for months after normal eating resumed. The damage outlasted the restriction. Muscle tissue is the first major casualty of severe restriction because the body catabolizes lean muscle for fuel. Since muscle is the primary driver of resting metabolism, every pound of muscle lost permanently reduces the number of calories burned daily at rest. You lose the weight and lose the engine simultaneously. A long-term study tracking contestants from a well-known weight loss competition found that 6 years after filming, metabolisms had slowed by an average of 500 additional calories per day compared to what would be expected for their body weight. 500 calories every single day. A metabolic penalty that did not recover. Hormonal disruption accompanies severe restriction as well. Leptin, the satiety hormone, drops dramatically, while ghrelin, the hunger hormone, surges, creating a biological state specifically engineered to force you to eat. You tried to make the engine run on fumes, and now the engine is half the size it was. Well done. You broke your own car trying to save on gas. 4. Quitting your job to pursue your passion full-time is the brave, logical next move. The side hustle is profitable. The love for it is real. You have the numbers. Make the leap. What the enthusiasm skips entirely is that converting a passion into a primary income source systematically strips away everything that made the passion enjoyable, replacing creative freedom with financial desperation, and effectively converting you from a person who loves something into a person who survives by performing it. Activities performed for intrinsic motivation become associated with obligation and performance anxiety the moment financial survival depends on them. Psychologists call this motivational crowding out. The joy gets replaced by the pressure of the invoices, and the thing you loved becomes the thing you cannot afford to get wrong. The failure statistics are not a secret. Approximately 20% of new businesses fail within the first year. 45% are gone by year 5. 65% by year 10. But the emotional toll begins immediately, well before the statistics catch up. The income gap is almost universally underestimated. Most side hustles generate irregular revenue that looks deceptively promising across 3 to 6 months, but cannot absorb health insurance, self-employment taxes at 15.3%, quarterly tax payments, and basic business overhead simultaneously. The fans who supported the project as admirers become paying customers with expectations, and that dynamic shift is jarring in a way that permanently alters the creator's relationship to their own work. The craft you used to do on weekends for yourself because you loved it is now the thing a stranger is demanding a refund on. Sleep deprivation is nearly universal in early entrepreneurship, Research indicates founders average 3 to 4 years of sustained sleep disruption, which impairs decision-making at exactly the moment good decisions matter most. Many entrepreneurs discover that the skill that made the side hustle profitable, whether it's design, writing, or cooking, becomes a fraction of the actual job. 60 to 80% of running a business is administration, accounting, marketing, and customer management. You loved making pottery on Sundays. Now it is Monday through Sunday. You resent pottery, your savings are gone, and your best customer just left a 1-star review. 5. Home renovations are always investments. You are building equity. You are not spending money. You are improving an asset. That framing is how people end up financially worse off than they started, in a home they can no longer afford to sell. The majority of home renovations return less than 70 cents on every dollar spent, and several popular upgrades actively reduce resale value or trigger cascading structural problems the original issue would never have caused. The data on this is consistent. Annual industry reporting on cost versus value shows most renovations recoup 50 to 70% of their cost at resale. Luxury upgrades, high-end kitchen remodels, elaborate outdoor spaces, swimming pools frequently recoup as little as 30 to 50%. Swimming pools are one of the most reliable ways to reduce a home's appeal rather than increase it. In most markets, a pool adds $0 to $20,000 in value, while costing $50,000 to $100,000 to install, and $3,000 to $5,000 annually to maintain. Many buyers actively exclude pools from their search because they see them as liabilities. The over-improvement trap is real and well documented. Upgrading a home significantly beyond what comparable properties in the neighborhood sell for is financially unrecoverable. Appraisers anchor value to neighboring sales, not construction costs. You can build a magnificent home in the wrong neighborhood and be unable to get back what you put in. Do-it-yourself renovation disasters are a separate epidemic. Improperly permitted additions can force complete deconstruction at sale. Unpermitted electrical work can void homeowners' insurance. Amateur plumbing repairs routinely cause water damage, costing 5 to 10 times the original repair. Contractors refer to scope creep by name, that $3,000 bathroom refresh that becomes a $25,000 project the moment walls are opened, and decades of original construction problems are discovered. Emotional attachment to renovation decisions correlates directly with poor return on investment choices. Homeowners renovate for personal taste rather than market appeal, reducing the buyer pool at resale. One documented case involved a homeowner who spent $180,000 on additions to a home in a neighborhood where comparable properties sold for $220,000. The house appraised at $230,000 at sale. You took a perfectly functional car, spent $40,000 customizing it to your exact specifications, and discovered the buyer wanted a sedan. 6. Crowdfunding is free money from people who believe in your vision. Post the campaign, share it around, collect the funding, and change your life. The pure upside framing is the first problem. Crowdfunding campaigns are public contracts with strangers who expect delivery, and the majority of funded campaigns either fail to fulfill their promises, collapse publicly, or cost significantly more to execute than they raised. Kickstarter's own data shows that approximately 9% of successfully funded projects fail to deliver any rewards at all. A further meaningful percentage deliver late, incomplete, or inferior versions of what was promised. These are not edge cases. They are a consistent pattern embedded in how the model works. Fulfillment costs are systematically underestimated by first-time campaigners. Shipping, packaging, manufacturing minimums, and transaction fees. Kickstarter takes 5%. Payment processors take an additional 3 to 5%. Can consume 20 to 40% of raised funds before a single unit is produced. This means a campaign that raised $100,000 may have $60,000 or less to actually make the product it promised. The reward tier trap is a specific and common version of this. Campaigns offering physical products at low price points often discover that material costs, labor, and shipping exceed the reward price, meaning every successful backer represents a financial loss, and the more successful the campaign, the more money is lost. Social media amplification works in both directions. The same online community that funded the project will document, screenshot, and publicly catalog every broken promise with the same enthusiasm they used to promote it. There is a permanent record. Tax obligations blindside a significant number of first-time campaigners. Crowdfunded money is generally treated as taxable income in the United States, and campaigns raising $50,000 or more can owe $10,000 to $15,000 in taxes the creator never budgeted for. Multiple failed campaigns have resulted in creators being sued by backers under consumer protection laws in various states, converting what began as community enthusiasm into class action exposure. You asked the internet to believe in you. The internet said yes with its wallet, and now the internet is keeping receipts, screenshots, and a dedicated forum thread documenting your every move. 7. Sharing your life online builds community, creates opportunity, and can generate real income. The more authentic you are, the better. Vulnerability is strength. Post everything. The part no one explains is that chronological public documentation of your private life creates a permanent, searchable, legally discoverable archive that future employers, courts, partners, and adversaries can access indefinitely, and will. Employment screening data shows that approximately 70% of employers review candidates' social media profiles, and 54% have decided not to hire someone based on content found online, including posts made years or decades earlier. The platform's delete button does not address this. The right to be forgotten is not a universal legal right in the United States. Content posted publicly is indexed by search engines and archived by third-party services that operate completely independently of whatever platform it was originally posted to. You can delete the post. The archive keeps it. Legal discovery in civil and criminal proceedings routinely includes social media archives. Posts, location check-ins, photographs, and stories have been used as evidence in divorce proceedings, personal injury claims, insurance fraud investigations, and criminal trials. The content you posted for your followers is admissible in court, and no one mentioned that in the terms of service in a way you were likely to notice. The algorithmic dimension makes this worse. Platforms are engineered to reward emotional, dramatic, and personal content with greater reach, which trains users to progressively disclose more intimate information in exchange for engagement metrics. You are being incentivized to share more of what is most dangerous to share. Financial vulnerability is a documented direct consequence. Posting travel content, luxury purchases, or income milestones publicly has been directly linked to targeted burglaries, financial scams, and identity theft in law enforcement reporting. Influencer burnout research shows that individuals who monetize personal authenticity report higher rates of identity confusion and clinical anxiety than those who maintain separation between public and private life. The context collapse problem underlies all of it. Content created for one audience is instantly visible to all audiences simultaneously. The joke for your college friends reads identically to your grandmother, your employer, and a journalist. You built a very detailed autobiography, published it publicly every day for 10 years, and then acted surprised when someone read it. 8. More exercise is always better. Push through the pain. Soreness means it is working. True dedication means no rest days. Ever. This belief has sent people to emergency rooms, stripped their hormones, collapsed their immune systems, and ultimately produced athletes who are measurably slower and weaker than they were before all the extra work. Overtraining syndrome is a clinically recognized condition defined by the European College of Sports Science as a prolonged, maladaptive response to excessive training without adequate recovery. And the key distinction is that it does not resolve with a few extra hours of sleep. It is a systemic breakdown. The hormonal consequences are measurable and severe. Chronic overtraining elevates cortisol while suppressing testosterone and growth hormone, creating a biological environment that is actively hostile to the muscle growth, the training was designed to produce. You are exercising aggressively in order to build a body that is chemically preventing you from building it. Rhabdomyolysis, the breakdown of muscle tissue into the bloodstream, is a documented risk of extreme exercise sessions and can cause acute kidney failure. Emergency departments report these cases with regularity among enthusiastic gym attendees who attempt intense programs without appropriate conditioning. Elite athletes who overtrain show documented performance decrements of 5 to 15% compared to properly recovered athletes, meaning more training literally produces a slower, weaker competitor. The immune suppression findings are consistent across research. There is a documented window lasting 3 to 72 hours after intense exercise during which immune function drops significantly, during which respiratory infections become dramatically more probable. The person who trains hardest is also the most biologically exposed to getting sick immediately afterward. The psychological symptoms of overtraining syndrome mirror clinical depression with unsettling precision. Loss of motivation, mood disturbances, sleep disruption, difficulty concentrating. And many athletes seek mental health support before anyone identifies the physical cause. Recovery from full overtraining syndrome can take 6 to 12 months of dramatically reduced or eliminated training. The person who never took a rest day ends up taking 200 consecutive rest days, producing none of the results the obsessive training was supposed to deliver. You decided the machine needed to run 24 hours a day with no maintenance, and now the machine is in the shop for 6 months. Turns out no days off is excellent advice for breaking things. 9. Researching your own symptoms online is responsible. Proactive healthcare. You know your body. The information is right there. Why wait for a doctor when you can find out now? Because what you will find, with remarkable consistency, is the worst possible explanation for whatever you typed in. And your brain will treat that worst-case scenario as the most likely one, regardless of probability. This is not a personal failure. It is the design of the system you are using. Researchers at Microsoft and the University of Exeter independently documented that online symptom searches systematically escalate towards severe diagnoses because content about serious conditions generates far more web traffic and is therefore algorithmically prominent. The algorithm is not surfacing what is most likely. It is surfacing what is most clicked on, and people click on terrifying things. One major symptom checker was evaluated in a Harvard study and found to suggest the correct diagnosis as the first result only 34% of the time. For serious conditions, it frequently suggested diagnoses several severity levels above the actual issue. Health anxiety disorder, the clinical pattern of persistent, disproportionate fear of having a serious illness, affects approximately 4 to 5% of the population and has a documented onset trigger in online health research. The digital availability of medical information has coincided with a measurable increase in health anxiety diagnoses. The nocebo effect makes this physically consequential, not just psychologically uncomfortable. Believing you have a condition produces measurable physical symptoms. Clinical trials have documented that participants given inert placebos and told they might experience side effects reported those side effects at statistically significant rates. You can think yourself into symptoms. Self-treatment based on self-diagnosis is the step that converts the problem from psychological to physical. The FDA receives thousands of annual reports of adverse events from self-prescribed supplements and medications. People who arrive at medical appointments convinced of their own diagnosis are statistically more likely to resist a contradictory professional assessment, delaying correct treatment regardless of clinical evidence in front of them. One meta-analysis found that patients who extensively researched symptoms before appointments reported higher anxiety and lower satisfaction with their actual diagnosis. You typed your headache into a search engine and ended up convinced you had 3 unrelated conditions simultaneously. The doctor said, drink more water. 10. Keeping things is responsible. You might need it later. Objects have value. Storage is free. Getting rid of possessions is waste, and a careful person holds on to things. This philosophy, pursued to its logical conclusion, has caused floor collapses, house fires, complete financial ruin, forced property loss, and documented fatalities, all while the person at the center of it believed they were being sensible. Hoarding disorder is recognized in the DSM-5 as a distinct diagnosis characterized by persistent difficulty discarding possessions, regardless of actual value, and it affects an estimated 2 to 6% of the population. Residential floors have standard load-bearing ratings, typically 40 pounds per square foot for living areas, and documented hoarding cases have caused floor collapses under the weight of accumulated material, with fatalities on record. The structure of the home was not designed for the weight of every object the occupant was unwilling to release. Fire risk increases dramatically with accumulated possessions. The National Fire Protection Association identifies cluttered living conditions as a major contributing factor in residential fire fatalities, not just because there is more to burn, but because blocked exits make escape nearly impossible, and stacked combustible material makes suppression impossible. The economic destruction compounds over time in a specific and ironic way. Items kept because they have value rapidly lose market value through degradation, rodent damage, and obsolescence while sitting in storage. The imagined financial portfolio depreciates to zero, and the cost of eventually removing it escalates. Professional hoarding remediation costs between $1,000 and $20,000. The item that was worth keeping is worth nothing, and removing it now costs money too. Health consequences include documented pest infestations, mold accumulation in blocked areas, and air quality degradation that exacerbates respiratory conditions. Legal consequences include condemnation orders, municipal fines, and forced removal. Several documented cases end with the occupant losing the property entirely after remediation costs exceed the home's value. The core psychological paradox is precise and brutal. Hoarding behavior is driven by perceived catastrophic loss at the thought of discarding anything, yet the disorder consistently produces the exact catastrophic losses: home, health, relationships, finances. The person was attempting to prevent. You kept everything to protect against loss. You lost everything anyway, and there is also a municipal notice on the door and a wait list for a dumpster. 11. Avoiding risk is the same as being safe. Don't invest. Don't expose yourself. Don't make dramatic moves. Caution is wisdom. Stay still. What this framework quietly ignores is that risk avoidance is itself a risk, and unlike the risks being avoided, it operates invisibly and accumulates silently until a crisis makes the damage undeniable. The clearest financial example requires only basic arithmetic. Money kept in a standard savings account earning 0.5% annually loses purchasing power at the current average inflation rate of 3 to 4% per year. The money is technically present and technically growing. It is also reliably worth less every year. Cautious savings accounts produce negative real returns in normal economic conditions. That is not a dramatic scenario. That is the baseline. Medical risk avoidance follows the same logic with higher personal stakes. People who avoid preventive screenings because they fear a bad result statistically receive later-stage diagnoses with dramatically worse outcomes. Colorectal cancer caught at stage 1 carries a survival rate above 90%. Caught at stage 4, the survival rate drops to 14%. The avoidance of potential bad news produces a certainty of worse outcomes. Career stagnation through excessive caution is documented in longitudinal professional research. Workers who remain in the same role beyond the optimal growth window see declining wage growth, skill erosion, and reduced employability over time. The safe job becomes a trap, not because anything bad happened, but because nothing happened, and the person became less competitive without noticing. The omission bias is a documented cognitive pattern that explains the emotional logic here. People feel more responsible for active harms than passive ones. But outcomes do not care about the distinction. Insurance underpurchasing is a specific and measurable version of this failure. Millions of households carry insufficient coverage to absorb a single major event, meaning the attempt to save on premiums results in catastrophic financial exposure when the event arrives, which it eventually does. Social risk avoidance, refusing difficult conversations, declining to enforce limits, avoiding conflict, produces worse relationship outcomes over time, as resentment compounds beneath a surface of artificial peace. You played it perfectly safe for 20 years. The score when you checked was inflation 1, missed diagnosis 1, stagnant career 1, you 0. 12. Standing your ground at work, going to human resources, sending the strongly worded email, refusing to compromise on principle. This is how you get justice and earn respect. The documented reality is that workplace conflict escalation is a negative-sum game, and the person who escalates hardest consistently suffers the most lasting professional consequences, regardless of who was morally in the right. Human resources departments are legally and structurally aligned with the employer's interest, not the employee's. Their primary function is to minimize organizational liability, which frequently means documenting the complaining employee's behavior rather than resolving the underlying dispute. Going to HR is not going to a referee. It is announcing yourself to the organization's legal risk management team. Reference check culture means the consequences extend well beyond the original employer. Informal reference networks in most industries mean that a reputation for being difficult travels faster than any formal record, across organizations, across years. The email that felt like justified self-defense becomes a permanent record. Workplace conflict escalations that move to written communication create documentation that is discoverable in litigation, reviewable by leadership, and often forwarded internally by recipients who were never meant to be part of the dispute. Research on workplace conflict outcomes consistently shows that employees who escalate formally are statistically more likely to leave the organization within 12 months than those who de-escalate, often involuntarily. The Streisand effect applies directly. Aggressive responses to perceived slights frequently amplify the original issue, drawing attention from leadership that would otherwise have never noticed the situation existed. LinkedIn and professional network dynamics mean that managers and colleagues encountered years later at completely different organizations can affect hiring decisions based on impressions formed long before. The professional world in most industries is smaller than it appears from inside it. The psychological concept of moral licensing explains why the trap works so effectively. People who are genuinely wronged feel justified in escalating without restraint, believing righteousness protects them from consequences. It does not. You were absolutely right. You have the documentation to prove it. You also have a 2-year employment gap and 3 former managers who declined to return calls. 13. You've invested too much to quit now. The degree, the relationship, the business, the project. Years are in it. Walking away means all of it was wasted. This reasoning sounds like discipline. It is one of the most extensively documented cognitive errors in the history of behavioral economics, and it is responsible for some of the most catastrophic, self-inflicted disasters available to human beings. Because the more you have already lost, the more powerful the trap becomes. The sunk cost fallacy is formally defined as the tendency to continue a failing endeavor because of previously invested resources, time, money, emotional energy, when those past costs are irrecoverable and should be irrelevant to any future decision. The investment is gone whether you continue or not. Continuing does not recover it. It only adds to it. The geopolitical example is among the most documented in modern history. Declassified documents from multiple administrations show that the Vietnam War was continued in significant part because abandoning it would make previous casualties seem wasted. A decision framework applied to a situation where the only variable it could affect was how many additional casualties would follow. The Concorde aircraft program was known to be economically unviable well before production completed. British and French governments continued funding it for decades because stopping would make previous expenditures a waste, ultimately costing billions more than stopping would have. The logic that felt like commitment produced outcomes that were the opposite of the original goal. Personal relationship data mirrors this pattern. Longitudinal studies show that people in documented unhealthy relationships cite time already invested as a primary reason to remain. And the longer the relationship, the harder the exit, regardless of current relationship quality. Academic sunk cost traps, students who persist in wrong-fit programs because they have already completed 2 years, graduating with credentials they do not use while extending the financial and temporal loss rather than redirecting. Gambling research shows the identical mechanism. Players who are behind consistently increase bet sizes to recover losses, driven by a compulsion. The mathematical certainty of the strategy's failure cannot override. Kahneman and Tversky's loss aversion research shows humans feel the pain of a loss approximately twice as intensely as the pleasure of an equivalent gain, making sunk cost decisions feel emotionally logical while being mathematically destructive. You drove 3 hours in the wrong direction and refused to turn around because you had already driven 3 hours. You are now 6 hours from anywhere useful. 14. Over-apologizing is harmless politeness. Saying sorry makes conflict go away. Being agreeable keeps relationships smooth. It is always safer to apologize than to argue. The documented consequences of habitual, reflexive apologizing are the opposite of safe. It systematically erodes professional credibility, signals social vulnerability that invites exploitation, and creates a psychological pattern of diminished self-worth that compounds over time into something very difficult to reverse. Linguistic research on workplace communication shows that excessive apologetic framing, sorry to bother you, I might be wrong, but I just wanted to quickly, correlates directly with lower perceived competence ratings from colleagues and supervisors, regardless of the actual quality of the work being done. The apology does not neutralize the content, it undercuts it. The interpersonal dynamic is documented. Individuals who consistently over-apologize and accommodate signal low social dominance. And research in both organizational and social psychology shows this pattern attracts exploitative behavior rather than respect. Women are socialized to over-apologize at measurably higher rates than men, and studies show they apologize more frequently while simultaneously having higher thresholds for what they consider genuinely offensive behavior. They are apologizing for things they do not actually believe require apology, as social lubricant at professional and personal cost. The neurological consequence of chronic apology is a reinforced cognitive pattern. Repeatedly framing your presence and actions as impositions builds the neural pathways you use most. The brain constructs the architecture of low self-worth through repeated use, making it self-fulfilling over time. Negotiation research is particularly concrete. In salary negotiations, opening with apologetic framing measurably reduces initial offers. Reflexive apology during negotiation signals willingness to accept less, and the other party responds accordingly. The financial cost of habitual apology is not metaphorical. Apology inflation compounds the damage. When someone apologizes for everything, genuine apologies carry no weight. The social mechanism of the apology, which is supposed to acknowledge real harm, is diluted to meaninglessness through overuse. And paradoxically, chronic apologizers report higher interpersonal conflict over time, not less, because unresolved issues accumulate beneath a surface of constant false resolution that nobody actually feels settled by. You said sorry so often that people stopped hearing it, stopped believing it, and started mistaking your doorstep for a welcome mat. 15. If you research enough, you can manage your own health. Supplements, protocols, and online guidance are empowering. Self-reliance in healthcare is smart and responsible. What self-treating a misidentified condition actually produces is two simultaneous problems. The actual condition progresses untreated, while the self-treatment creates a secondary problem that now also requires addressing. Delayed diagnosis is among the leading drivers of preventable harm in developed countries. A Johns Hopkins study estimated that approximately 795,000 Americans annually suffer serious harm from diagnostic errors. And self-treatment before diagnosis guarantees that the diagnostic delay extends, sometimes past the point where the correct treatment is still available. The masking phenomenon is clinically significant. Over-the-counter anti-inflammatories, antacids, and pain medications commonly used in self-treatment suppress symptoms without resolving underlying conditions. Appendicitis, peptic ulcers, and cardiac events have all been delayed to critical stages through effective at-home symptom management. You treated the signal. The problem kept going. Supplement toxicity is underreported and severely underestimated by most people who take supplements. Fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, accumulate in tissue at toxic levels when taken in excess. Vitamin D toxicity produces symptoms including fatigue, weakness, and confusion that are identical to many conditions people self-treat for, creating a diagnostic loop that delays correction. Self-administered antibiotics create a specific and well-documented hazard. People who use leftover antibiotics for suspected infections frequently take the wrong antibiotic, at the wrong dose, for the wrong duration, exactly the 3 conditions required to cultivate antibiotic-resistant infections in their own body. Herbal supplement interaction with prescription medications is a serious documented risk that flies under the radar of most people who consider supplements to be inherently safe. Common botanical supplements reduce the effectiveness of oral contraceptives, antiretrovirals, and blood thinners when not disclosed to prescribing physicians. Mental health self-treatment is particularly dangerous because individuals who self-medicate for depression, anxiety, or attention issues frequently worsen the underlying condition while creating a secondary dependency. A study on health research behavior found that the more information people consume, the more confident they become in their conclusions, regardless of whether those conclusions are accurate. You spent 6 months confidently treating your left knee when the problem was your right hip. Both knees are now worse. The hip is still broken. 16. Productivity systems, morning routines, habit stacking, biohacking, and optimization are the path to peak performance. Systemize everything, waste nothing, and squeeze maximum output from every hour. The people who apply this philosophy most aggressively are statistically among the most burned out, not the most productive. The World Health Organization classified burnout as an occupational phenomenon in its International Disease Classification in 2019, and researchers note it is highest among high performers who have most completely internalized productivity ideology. The extreme early wake time mythology is a specific and measurable version of the problem. Productivity advocates who promote 4 in the morning, wake times, hour-long morning routines, and rigid daily optimization schedules overlook that sleep deprivation impairs the exact cognitive functions, creativity, problem-solving, emotional regulation, that the routines are designed to enhance. You are running on deficit precisely when the performance is supposed to peak. The productivity paradox is documented in organizational research. Workers who optimize their schedules most aggressively show short-term output gains, followed by sustained creativity and decision-making declines. The functions optimization was meant to improve are the ones it degrades over the medium and long term. Habit stacking as a rigid daily system becomes a documented source of shame and anxiety when habits are missed, and researchers have noted that rigid systems convert self-improvement into a new arena for self-criticism. Every missed habit is a personal failure, layered on top of whatever was already difficult about the day. Biohacking costs are both financial and physiological. Aggressive supplement regimens, continuous glucose monitors, sleep tracking devices, and recovery subscriptions consume significant cognitive and financial resources, and the monitoring itself becomes a stressor that disrupts the sleep it is supposed to measure. The rest guilt phenomenon is documented specifically in high optimizers. Individuals who have built elaborate performance systems feel psychological discomfort during unstructured time, which eliminates the recovery function that makes any level of performance sustainable. Longitudinal data on high performers shows that the most durable top performers across virtually every measured domain are not the most optimized, but the most consistent. With sustainable moderate effort, outperforming intense optimized sprints across 10-year time horizons. You built a perfect machine for peak human performance, and then ran it at full capacity for 18 hours a day until it caught fire. Incredible systems design. 0 points for engineering. 17. If you could just live somewhere else. The coast, the mountains, the warm city, the quieter town, everything would be better. Location is destiny. Move, and the problems move on. You still go. The person doing the relocating arrives at the destination completely intact, which is the entire problem. The fresh start illusion is studied extensively in behavioral psychology. People dramatically overestimate the degree to which changing external circumstances will alter internal states. Anxiety, depression, relational patterns, and self-perception travel with the individual regardless of zip code because they are not geographic, they are structural. Research on major positive life changes shows that adaptation occurs within 6 to 12 months. The boost in well-being from a new city, new relationship, or new environment returns to baseline as novelty fades, a well-documented process called hedonic adaptation. The dramatic change produces a dramatic feeling that has a documented expiration date. The financial consequences of relocation are systematically underestimated. Moving costs, new lease deposits, cost of living adjustments, and the loss of local professional networks consistently cost between $15,000 and $40,000 in the first year alone, before the person has determined whether they actually want to stay. Remote work-driven relocation during the early 2020s became a documented case study. Large numbers of people relocated to smaller markets, and a significant percentage returned within 18 months, citing isolation, cultural mismatch, and the absence of urban amenities they had never consciously valued until they were gone. Social network disruption is the most consistently underestimated consequence of relocation. Harvard research identifies close social relationships as the single strongest predictor of long-term health and happiness, and relocation severs those networks at the exact moment that disruption makes them most necessary. The tourist trap problem explains many relocation disasters. People who vacation somewhere and decide to move confuse the experience of being a temporary visitor with the reality of being a resident, operating without professional obligation, social routine, or the friction that reveals a place's actual character. Population movement data shows consistent patterns. States with the highest in-migration also show high out-migration 3 to 5 years later, as the same people who fled one location flee the dream destination for the next one. You packed up your entire life, drove 1,400 miles, unpacked everything, and discovered you had also packed yourself. The problems got there first. 18 in an argument. The goal is to be right. Present the evidence, dismantle the other person's position, win the argument. If they cannot accept facts, that is their failure. Being empirically correct in an argument and being tactically effective in deploying that correctness are entirely different skills, and the person who is factually right while being relationally brutal consistently ends up with neither the relationship nor the behavioral change they were fighting for. Psychological reactance theory explains the core mechanism. People who feel their autonomy is being challenged by an aggressive argument become more resistant to the correct position, not less. The stronger and more dominating the argument, the stronger the defensive response. You are producing opposition with the force of your correctness. The backfire dynamic describes a tendency for people to double down on incorrect beliefs when challenged aggressively. The challenge activates identity, defense, rather than rational reassessment. Being right and proving it loudly are two different acts with often opposite results. Relationship research by John Gottman identifies contempt, eye-rolling, dismissiveness, sarcasm deployed as weapons, as the single strongest predictor of relationship dissolution, more predictive than frequency of disagreement or intensity of conflict. Contempt kills the relationship that the argument was ostensibly trying to fix. Winning arguments by demolishing the other person produces what therapists call emotional withdrawal. The losing party progressively disengages from future communication, creating the appearance of peace through the reality of disconnection. The relationship becomes quiet, not resolved. Professional consequences mirror this pattern. People who consistently and visibly defeat colleagues in meetings are rated lower on teamwork and leadership metrics despite being rated higher on intelligence. Organizations promote relatability at a higher rate than correctness. The "I told you so" impulse is among the most relationally damaging behaviors documented in couples therapy. Even when completely factually accurate, using a correct prediction as social currency produces long-term resentment that outlasts the original argument by years. Persuasion research shows the most durable behavior and belief changes come from individuals arriving at conclusions themselves, through facilitated questioning rather than argument, a finding that is counterintuitive and consistently replicable. You won every single argument. You have perfect records. You are also eating dinner alone, wondering why no one calls anymore. 19. Save everything. Spend nothing. Every dollar saved is a dollar of freedom. Frugality is discipline. Delayed gratification is the highest financial virtue. What this ideology, pursued to its extreme, actually produces is a documented pathway to missed experiences, relational strain, deferred medical consequences, and in clinical cases, a form of financial anxiety disorder that generates the same misery as poverty, despite the complete presence of wealth. Research on scarcity mindset documents that obsessive focus on financial conservation consumes cognitive bandwidth, narrowing decision-making, increasing error rates, and reducing creative thinking in ways that produce worse financial outcomes than a more balanced approach would have. The cognitive tax of hyperfrugality is measurable. Deathbed regret studies consistently skew toward experiences not had, relationships not pursued, and risks not taken. Financial caution as a governing life philosophy is rated retrospectively as a leading source of regret across multiple longitudinal studies. Medical cost deferral is among the most dangerous and documented consequences of extreme frugality. Dental care, preventive screenings, mental health treatment, and prescription medications are routinely deferred by people optimizing for reduced spending. And conditions that cost $500 to treat at detection cost $15,000 to $50,000 when deferred. The savings are negative when measured against delayed treatment costs. Relationship strain from financial rigidity is extensively documented in marital research. Financial conflict is consistently rated as the leading cause of marital stress and the second most cited reason for divorce in United States surveys. The partner who cannot spend freely on anything, not meals, not experiences, not small pleasures, creates a relational environment of constant scarcity regardless of actual bank balance. The FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early, has produced well-documented cases of extreme savers who achieved their numerical goal and discovered they had optimized away every activity they found meaningful. Several prominent voices in that community have written publicly about the psychological crisis of arriving at financial independence with no idea what to do with it. Keeping cash in savings accounts during inflationary periods is capital destruction. $100,000 in a 0.5% account loses $3,500 to $5,500 in purchasing power annually in a 4 to 6% inflation environment. Frugality actively destroys the wealth it protects. You saved every dollar, denied yourself everything, accumulated a perfect financial statement, and discovered at 60 that a spreadsheet is a terrible companion for dinner. 20. Fake it till you make it. Project success and success will follow. Dress for the job you want. Confidence is everything. The appearance of wealth attracts wealth. Performing financial success at a level you have not reached is a documented accelerant of real financial failure, because the maintenance costs of the performance consistently outrun the income it was supposed to attract. The lifestyle inflation trap is studied in personal finance research. Individuals who acquire luxury signifiers on credit to project success find that servicing those debts consumes the income that would otherwise fund actual wealth accumulation. You are borrowing against a future you are preventing yourself from reaching. Luxury vehicle depreciation is one of the most concrete examples. A $70,000 luxury vehicle loses approximately $15,000 to $20,000 in value in the first year alone, while requiring insurance, maintenance, and financing costs that frequently total $1,200 to $1,800 per month. A six-figure income can be entirely consumed by the performance of having a six-figure income. Business vanity spending, premium office space before you have clients, expensive branding before you have revenue, elaborate equipment before you have output, appears in small business failure post-mortems as one of the top 5 unnecessary early expenditures that accelerate cash flow collapse. The social media performance economy has created a documented population of creators who spend more on equipment, locations, outfits, and props to produce content about success than they earn from the content. A loop moving consistently in the wrong direction. The psychological concept of impression management describes the cognitive load involved. Sustaining a performance for an audience requires constant attention, energy, and financial resources. The mental overhead of maintaining the performance is measurably exhausting and error-prone, degrading the judgment needed to actually build what is being performed. Credit card debt accumulated in the performance of success. Restaurants, clothing, travel, entertainment presented as achievement, carries average interest rates of 22 to 28%, meaning the performance compounds its cost with every billing cycle. Historical examples of sustained performance collapsing under the weight of its own maintenance exist at every scale, from individual bankruptcies to organizational fraud. You spent 12 years pretending to be the person you wanted to become, and the bill for the performance arrived before the performance paid off. 21. Keeping the peace is virtuous. Absorb the frustrations. Never make demands. Avoid conflict. Stay agreeable. Nice people do not make things uncomfortable. The documented outcome of the complete absence of communicated personal limits is not peacefulness. It is pressurized accumulation that terminates in a single disproportionate event capable of damaging every relationship simultaneously. Passive aggression is the clinical term for the predictable behavioral outcome of chronically suppressed needs. Individuals who cannot express limits directly express them indirectly through withdrawal, subtle subversion, and quiet sabotage, creating far more relational damage than direct communication would ever have produced. The explosion after silence pattern is documented in anger research. People who consistently suppress frustration show larger physiological stress responses, elevated cortisol, elevated heart rate, than those who express emotion proportionally. The suppression is not neutral. It is building pressure with nowhere to go. Workplace studies on people perceived as endlessly agreeable show they are rated as less competent and less promotable over time, not despite their agreeableness, but because of it. The inability to protect your own time and advocate for your own positions is interpreted as a lack of leadership judgment. The clinical concept of codependency represents the extreme version of this pattern. The individual organizes their entire identity around others' needs, systematically neglecting their own, and research consistently shows this produces both lower personal well-being and worse outcomes for the person being accommodated. The doormat to dragon pattern in relationship therapy is documented with enough regularity that therapists name it. The partner who never complained exits the relationship suddenly and without apparent warning, leaving the other person genuinely confused, because all the signals were suppressed rather than expressed, and the exit appears to come from nowhere. Physical health consequences are measurable. People in high-demand, boundary-free environments show elevated rates of hypertension, autoimmune disorders, and anxiety compared to those who can regulate their own engagement. Research on assertiveness training consistently shows that learning to communicate limits improves both relationship quality and personal well-being simultaneously. The discomfort of the limit-setting conversation is almost universally smaller than the damage of the alternative. You said nothing for 4 years, smiled through everything, and then burned the building down on a Tuesday. Everyone was surprised. You were not. 22. Sharing what you know helps people. If someone is making a mistake you can see, it is your responsibility to say something. Advice is a gift. It is not received as a gift. It is received as a judgment wearing a helpfulness costume, and the person who habitually offers it unrequested is systematically excluded from authentic conversation, because no one shares real problems with someone who immediately starts fixing them. Psychological research on advice giving shows that unsolicited guidance activates the same neural pathways as criticism, even when the content is objectively correct and the intent is genuinely kind. The experience of receiving unrequested advice registers as a social dominance assertion, regardless of how warmly it is delivered. The fix-it response to emotional sharing is one of the most consistent sources of relational rupture in couples therapy. Partners who respond to emotional disclosure with immediate problem-solving cause, the disclosing person to feel unheard and evaluated rather than supported, despite genuinely helpful intent. Repeated enough, it trains the other person to stop disclosing. Self-disclosure research shows people confide in individuals who have demonstrated the ability to listen without converting the disclosure into a performance review. Repeated advice giving removes the advice giver from the category of safe confidants, cutting them off from authentic relationship. The Dunning-Kruger intersection with unsolicited advice is documented. The most frequent unsolicited advisors consistently overestimate both their knowledge of the situation and the quality of the advice they are providing. The confidence with which advice is delivered is often inversely correlated with how welcome it is. Professional reputation consequences are consistent. The colleague who always has a suggestion, a correction, and a better way is rated lower on team satisfaction surveys, despite rating themselves as highly contributing members. The guidance is experienced as a sustained implicit critique of every decision made without consulting them. Social media amplifies the dynamic. Accounts that respond to every post with corrections, additions, and unrequested counsel are blocked, muted, and unfollowed at high rates. Digital communities document and actively avoid this pattern by name. The deepest irony in this entire dynamic is that professional coaches and therapists, people trained specifically to help others improve, are explicitly taught not to give advice. People who arrive at conclusions through facilitated self-discovery maintain those conclusions at far higher rates than people who are handed correct answers. You fixed every problem you heard about. You stopped hearing about problems. 23. Record everything. Take screenshots. Document every interaction. The paper trail protects you. Evidence is power. Obsessive personal documentation of conflicts, disputes, and interactions frequently backfires in ways that turn the tool against the person who built it. Because the documentation becomes evidence of the documenter's state of mind, and the act of recording damages the relationships it was meant to protect. Recording laws vary dramatically by jurisdiction, and in two-party consent states, recording a conversation without all parties' knowledge is a criminal offense. The person methodically building an evidence file may simultaneously be committing wiretapping violations. The legal system created to protect them is the one they are violating. Discovery works in both directions in any litigation. When legal action is initiated using personal documentation, all communications, notes, texts, and emails become equally discoverable by the opposing side. The detailed record kept for protection is now available to the opposing attorney, who will search it for inconsistencies, emotional language, and damaging admissions you did not realize you were making. HR professionals report that employees who submit extremely detailed contemporaneous documentation of every interaction frequently trigger investigations of themselves. The documentation pattern is assessed as potentially problematic behavior independent of what the documents contain. Relationship consequences of visible documentation are immediate. Someone who announces they are recording a conversation, obviously screenshots messages, or clearly preserves every exchange creates a chilling effect that ends authentic communication. The relationship converts to performance. Digital forensics can recover deleted messages and files, meaning people who document aggressively and then selectively delete to clean the record are frequently caught by forensic recovery, which makes the selective editing a separate evidentiary problem on top of the original one. The smoking gun fantasy that drives most obsessive documentation rarely materializes as intended. Context, tone, and sequence matter enormously in how documentation is interpreted, and the same evidence frequently supports multiple narratives simultaneously. Mental health consequences of hypervigilant documentation are documented. The behavior maintains psychological distress rather than resolving it, sustaining rumination and intrusive thought patterns consistent with trauma responses. You documented everything, preserved every record, and built an airtight case. You also documented yourself building the case. That was less helpful. 24. Sharing your goals makes you accountable. Tell people what you're going to do. Announce it publicly. Commitment creates follow-through. The research says the opposite, and it has said so across multiple replications for decades. Publicly announcing a goal produces a documented neurological satisfaction response that is functionally identical to the satisfaction of achieving the goal. And this premature reward systematically reduces the motivation to do the actual work, because the brain has already received part of the payment. The foundational research on this comes from Peter Gollwitzer, who documented in the early 1980s that individuals who announced their intentions were significantly less likely to follow through than those who kept them private. The announcement provided social identity satisfaction that reduced behavioral drive. NYU research confirmed the effect. When goal-relevant identities are acknowledged by others, people feel closer to achieving them. The social acknowledgement is processed as partial completion of the task. Social media goal announcements follow a specific and observable pattern. High engagement on the announcement post produces the social reward immediately, before any action is taken, and studies tracking behavioral follow-through show lower completion rates for publicly announced goals than for privately held ones. The accountability paradox is the nuance most people miss. Accountability partnerships, telling one specific person who will check in on you, are genuinely helpful. But public broadcasting to a large audience produces a different dynamic where the social performance of commitment replaces the actual work. Visualization research adds a counterintuitive finding. People who spend time mentally pre-living the achievement of a goal report lower subsequent energy and effort than those who visualize the process of working toward it. Mental arrival before physical arrival deflates the drive. Career announcement consequences are specifically damaging. People who announce transitions, launches, and projects on professional networks before execution create expectations that make graceful exit from a changed plan nearly impossible, adding social pressure to persist in a direction that may no longer make sense. The premature celebration phenomenon in organizational research shows that teams that celebrate milestone announcements before results are confirmed show lower completion rates on subsequent phases. You told everyone what you were going to do. They all said it sounded incredible. Your brain agreed. Then your brain took the rest of the year off, because apparently that was enough. 25. Refinancing saves money. Lower monthly payments mean more breathing room. Consolidating debt simplifies everything. The math is straightforward and the decision is obviously good. The majority of real-world refinancing applications extend total debt repayment, increase the total interest paid, and provide psychological relief while making the financial situation objectively worse. And the person who pursues them rarely realizes until it is too late to undo. The mortgage refinance math trap operates on the simple logic of monthly payment reduction. Lowering a monthly payment by extending the loan term feels like savings, but a 30-year mortgage refinanced into a new 30-year term at year 10 resets a decade of amortization and extends the payoff date by 10 additional years. The monthly payment went down. The total cost went up by tens of thousands of dollars. Studies of borrowers who consolidate credit card debt into personal loans show that approximately 70% accumulate comparable credit card balances again within 2 to 3 years, because consolidation addresses the symptom without addressing the behavior that created it. The debt is reorganized. The habit is intact. Home equity line of credit misuse converts unsecured debt into secured debt backed by the home itself. Credit card debt that was dischargeable in bankruptcy becomes a foreclosure risk. The person was trying to simplify their financial life and has instead attached their housing to their spending habits. Student loan refinancing carries a specific and irreversible risk. Federal student loans carry income-driven repayment protections, forgiveness programs, and forbearance options that are permanently forfeited when refinanced into private loans. Borrowers who refinance to capture a marginally lower interest rate trade. Significant flexibility for a negligible savings, and discover the trade-off only when a life event makes those protections necessary. The restart penalty in amortization is the mechanism most people never learn about. Most loans are structured so that early payments are overwhelmingly interest. Refinancing resets this structure entirely, meaning the borrower pays primarily interest again from the beginning of the new term. The psychological consequence of successfully completing a refinance, the fresh start feeling, produces a documented return to the spending patterns that created the original debt, because the slate feels clean even when the underlying architecture is unchanged. You reorganize the debt into a structure that felt simpler, paid significantly more for the privilege, and kept the habits. The math got worse, and you feel better about it. 26. You are not qualified enough yet. Wait until you know more. Apply when you're ready. Once you're sure, you'll put yourself forward. This is imposter syndrome describing itself as responsible preparation, and the behaviors it produces, waiting, deferring, under-applying, create real, objective, financial, and professional losses that compound over decades of a career. Imposter syndrome was documented by psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes in 1978, originally observed in high-achieving women who attributed their accomplishments to luck, timing, or error rather than competence. Subsequent research found it affects an estimated 70% of people at some point. The important finding is not how common it is. It is that it is completely unresponsive to accumulating more qualifications. The feeling does not decrease with additional credentials. It resets at the next level. A widely cited internal study found that men apply for positions when they meet approximately 60% of listed qualifications, while women apply only when they meet close to 100%. The result is a systematic self-exclusion from roles and salary levels the person is objectively qualified to hold. The credentials accumulation trap follows directly. People who pursue additional degrees and certifications to overcome the feeling consistently report that the new credential temporarily relieves it before it returns at the next threshold. The finish line moves. Salary negotiation data makes the financial cost concrete. Employees who do not negotiate starting compensation because they feel they have not yet earned the right to ask leave an average of $7,500 to $15,000 on the table annually. Over a 40-year career, the compounded difference exceeds $1 million. The confidence gap in performance evaluations operates invisibly. Individuals who self-evaluate lower are rated lower by managers, not because their work is inferior, but because the self-presentation signals that managers use to calibrate evaluations skew downward. Meritocracy assumptions fail in practice. Research consistently shows that employees who self-advocate, volunteer for visible projects, and apply for advancement are promoted at dramatically higher rates than equally qualified colleagues who wait to be recognized. The recognition rarely arrives uninvited. You spent 10 years becoming perfectly qualified for a room you never entered because you did not feel ready. The room was not waiting. It filled up without you. 27. In a crisis, communicate everything immediately. Transparency is integrity. Keep everyone updated. Do not go quiet. Unmanaged, over-frequent communication during a crisis is a documented amplifier of the crisis, because information shared before it is verified, framed, or actionable creates panic, speculation, and reputational damage that exceeds the original problem by a significant margin. Crisis communications research distinguishes between strategic transparency, deliberate, verified, timed disclosure, and anxious disclosure, which is immediate, unfiltered information sharing, driven by the desire to appear forthcoming. The latter consistently worsens outcomes across organizational, medical, and personal crises. The vacuum fills with speculation principle is frequently misapplied. PR professionals correctly note that silence creates speculation, but over-communication before facts are established creates contradictions. Contradictions are more damaging than initial silence because they signal either dishonesty or incompetence, regardless of the actual cause. The contrast between effective and catastrophic crisis communication has been studied repeatedly. Organizations that communicated quickly with verified information and clear action steps recovered from crises. Those whose communication was rapid but internally inconsistent and defensive destroyed their brands. Speed without accuracy is its own category of disaster. Social media crisis amplification is specifically documented. Posting reactive defenses to emerging controversy before the situation is fully understood consistently provides additional material that extends the news cycle. PR professionals call this feeding the beast. Each reactive post becomes another entry point for criticism. The medical disclosure parallel is clinically relevant. Physicians who communicate uncertain diagnoses with full emotional disclosure before differential diagnosis is complete create measurable patient anxiety responses. The framing of "we need to investigate several possibilities" performs significantly better for patient well-being than communicating suspicion of the worst outcome prematurely. The apology timing paradox applies to both corporate and personal contexts. Premature apologies issued before facts are established are frequently retracted as information develops. And retracted apologies are more damaging than delayed ones because they signal dishonesty even when the intent was good faith transparency. Group communication research shows that leaders who call immediate meetings before having a plan to present generate more anxiety than those who gather information first. You said everything you knew immediately, then everything you suspected, then corrected the first thing, then explained the correction. The crisis was a Tuesday. The reputation damage lasted 3 years. 28. Growth is always the goal. Scale everything. A business that is not growing is dying. Bigger is better. Get investors. Open more locations. Expand the model. Growth at the wrong pace. Funded by the wrong capital. In an unproven model is the primary documented mechanism through which profitable small businesses are converted into insolvent large ones. The pattern is so consistent, it has a name in business research: growth destroying profitability. Companies that are profitable at one location, one product, or one market segment frequently become unprofitable at scale because they dramatically underestimate the nonlinear cost increases that scaling requires: management layers, logistics complexity, quality control infrastructure, and customer service, demands that did not exist at smaller volume. The restaurant industry illustrates this with such regularity, it has become a category study. A single restaurant succeeding on one chef's quality and relationship with the space frequently loses both at the second and third location because the founding chef cannot be physically present in multiple places simultaneously. The thing that made it successful is not transferable at scale without investment that often exceeds what the expansion generates. Venture capital growth dynamics create a specific trap. Businesses that accept investment enter a contractual obligation to grow toward acquisition or initial public offering. This growth mandate frequently overrides business model sustainability, forcing expansion into markets before the core model is proven, at burn rates that consume the company before the growth justifies them. The founder's trap in scaling is well documented. The skills that make someone an excellent small business founder, hands-on, relationship-driven, operationally flexible, are frequently the exact skills that impede successful scaling, which requires systems thinking, delegation, and process standardization. Founders who do not recognize this transition destroy their businesses, trying to manage a large company using small company instincts. Cash flow versus profit confusion accelerates the collapse. Rapidly growing businesses frequently show impressive revenue growth while consuming cash faster than collections arrive. A business can be growing on paper and technically insolvent simultaneously, and the bankruptcy arrives despite strong reported sales figures. You had a beautiful, profitable, small fire. You threw gasoline on it to make it bigger. Now, you are trying to explain to investors why the building is gone. 29. Needing help is weakness. Figure it out yourself. People respect self-sufficiency. Do not burden others. Handle your problems alone. Refusing to ask for help is not self-sufficiency. It is the systematic rejection of efficiency, social capital, and the most powerful interpersonal bonding mechanism available to human beings, producing worse outcomes at every measurable level. The pratfall effect, documented by Elliot Aronson in 1966, demonstrates the counterintuitive core of this dynamic. People who display vulnerability and occasional imperfection are rated as more likable and competent than those who project relentless self-sufficiency. Showing that you need help increases perceived competence rather than reducing it, which is the opposite of the assumption that drives most help avoidance. Network research shows that people who ask for help from their professional and personal networks strengthen those relationships through the act of asking. The request creates obligation, reciprocity, and connection that the self-sufficient person never accesses. The network becomes functional rather than decorative. Time cost alone should end the argument. Most knowledge-based problems that take an individual hours to solve can be resolved in minutes by someone with direct, relevant experience. Refusing to ask converts a 5-minute conversation into a 5-hour research project, repeated across every problem encountered across years. The compounded time cost of chronic self-sufficiency is enormous and invisible. Mental health consequences of managing everything alone are measurably severe. People who chronically avoid help seeking for emotional distress show higher rates of clinical depression, anxiety disorders, and substance use than those who seek support. The suppression of help-seeking behavior accelerates the condition it was meant to conceal. Financial consequences of refusing professional guidance are consistently negative. Individuals who manage their own taxes, legal documents, and investment decisions without consultation make errors that cost multiples of what the professional guidance would have cost. The money saved on professional fees is spent covering the mistakes their absence produced. Workplace data is direct. Employees who ask questions, seek mentorship, and solicit feedback are promoted at higher rates, make fewer costly errors, and report higher job satisfaction than those committed to learning everything independently. You spent 5 years solving alone what a 15-minute conversation would have resolved. You are an expert in an extremely expensive and inefficient way to not ask for directions. 30. Imagining worst-case scenarios protects you. Thinking through everything that could go wrong is responsible preparation. Caution saves you from disaster. Catastrophizing is a clinically identified cognitive distortion, listed in diagnostic frameworks as a documented feature of generalized anxiety disorder, depression, and chronic pain conditions, and it does not protect the people who use it. It produces measurable anxiety, degrades decision-making, and through the avoidance behavior it generates, frequently creates the negative outcomes it was supposed to prevent. The neurological mechanism is precise. Catastrophic thinking activates the amygdala in the same way actual physical threat does. The body physiologically responds to imagined catastrophe with real cortisol elevation and sympathetic nervous system activation, producing a sustained stress state without a real stressor. You are experiencing the biological response to a disaster that has not happened and may never happen. Decision paralysis research shows that people who engage in extensive worst-case analysis make decisions more slowly, make worse decisions under that analysis, and experience more regret about their decisions than those who proceed with appropriate but not exhaustive caution. The analysis designed to improve the quality of choices reliably degrades it past a certain threshold. Avoidance behavior is the primary behavioral consequence of catastrophizing, and it is self-sealing. People who imagine severe negative outcomes avoid the situations they have imagined, and avoidance prevents the disconfirming experiences that would demonstrate the catastrophe was unlikely. You never find out you were wrong because you never go back to check. The self-fulfilling catastrophe mechanism operates precisely. People who catastrophize about social rejection avoid social situations, which produces real social isolation, which confirms the belief that social situations are dangerous, which justifies further avoidance. The catastrophizing generates the evidence that sustains it. Comparative probability distortions are measurable. Chronic catastrophizers consistently overestimate low-probability negative events and underestimate the compounding consequences of their own inaction. They are terrified of the wrong things, while the actual damage accumulates from standing still. Cognitive restructuring in clinical treatment specifically addresses this through probability estimation. Patients asked to estimate the actual likelihood of their feared outcome and compare it to their felt certainty consistently find a gap of 40 to 80 percentage points. You spent 3 years imagining the disaster in such detail that you never took the step. The destination is still there. Nothing happened, including the trip. 31. Experts know better. Follow the advice. Trust the algorithm. Do what the system recommends. Defer to authority. You are not qualified to decide. Complete outsourcing of personal judgment to external authorities is a documented pathway to catastrophic outcomes because no external system has access to your specific circumstances, values, and context. And several external systems are not optimized for your outcomes at all. The authority bias is documented across behavioral research and extensively replicated. People defer to authority figures at measurably higher rates than is rational, independent of whether the authority has relevant expertise or conflicting interests. Financial advisor conflicts of interest are structural and well documented. Commission-based advisors are in many contexts held to a suitability standard rather than a fiduciary one, meaning their advice must be suitable for you, not optimal for you, and products paying higher commissions are demonstrably recommended more frequently, regardless of whether they serve the client's best interest. You are receiving advice from someone whose compensation is partially determined by the advice they give. Algorithmic outsourcing on social platforms produces a specific and measurable form of cognitive atrophy. People who rely on platform algorithms for information curation become measurably less capable of evaluating sources independently over time. The tool compensates for the skill, while the skill degenerates. Medical second opinion data is among the most concrete evidence of the cost of deferred judgment. Studies show that 21% of patients who seek second opinions for serious diagnoses receive a meaningfully different diagnosis or treatment recommendation. The authority of the first physician and patients' reluctance to challenge it is responsible for a treatment gap that affects outcomes directly. GPS navigation dependency has been studied as a model of judgment atrophy in miniature. People who rely on navigation assistance show declining hippocampal activity and reduced ability to navigate independently over time. The tool replaces the skill rather than supplementing it. Influencer-driven decision-making is among the most expensive forms of outsourced judgment available. Financial products, health regimens, and lifestyle choices recommended by social media figures are optimized for partnership revenue, not for the circumstances of any individual follower. You delegated every decision until you arrived at someone else's life. It is well organized. It is well advised. It belongs entirely to the people whose advice you followed. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.